What a beautiful day! The sun is shining brightly and there's not a cloud in the sky. Oh, wait. It's 2 a.m. and we have to be up in 5 hours for an excursion to see how they catch king crabs. Today, I'm taking you north, way north, past the Arctic Circle to the most northern port in Europe, and into the land of the midnight sun. I'm Russ, and this is Explorations All Over. We're going from the red earth of Africa to the endless sunlight of the Arctic Circle. If you've been following my Far-Flung Adventures Africa series, you know we just wrapped up an unforgettable journey through the Ngorongoro crater, the Serengeti, and the vast plains of the Masai Mara. But today, I'm trading the Serengeti's lions for reindeer, and the golden sunsets of the savannah for the endless daylight of Norway's midnight sun. This episode takes you north, way north, on a voyage along Norway's fjords, where daylight never quite ends and every turn of the ship reveals another jaw-dropping view. And next time, I'll be joined by travel advisor Dee Koger for something completely different. A fun, conversational episode where we explore what kind of travel fits you. So, stay tuned for that. But first, let's head to the land of the midnight sun. We wanted to uncover the truth about this mysterious part of the world where the sun never sets. We also wanted to try out a new-to-us cruise line, Viking Ocean Cruises. Who better to explore the Norwegian fjords than with a Norwegian-owned cruise line, Viking? The itinerary was fantastic. Bergen, Norway, and up the Norwegian coast to Honningsvåg at the Nordkapp, the most northern port in Europe, and then across the North Sea to Scotland, Wales, and ending in London. Now, if you come in winter, this same cruise is called Into the Northern Lights. The opposite problem? All dark all the time. I'm not sure which would mess with my head more. This trip had so many firsts and a few lasts. When I was writing the script for this episode, I struggled to decide on how best to present the adventure because there were so many unexpected aspects. I love going chronologically, but that gets dull really fast. Start with the loved and end with the not so much? Been there, done that. So, I'm gonna jump all over as things pop into my mind. We live in a very diverse world, and I can say without hesitation that the passengers on Viking were anything but. It was the most homogeneous group of people I've ever had the pleasure, or displeasure, depending upon how you look at it, of traveling with. I say this because, as a gay man, being asked by a woman in the seat in front of us on the bus, "Where's your wife?" was astounding. But without missing a beat, I replied, "Sitting right next to me." I truly was expecting her to faint dead right there. That kind of summed up our Viking experience. Don't get me wrong, the ship was lovely and the crew couldn't have been better. As I said, the itinerary was wonderful and the cruise itself was beautiful. The best way to describe the Viking onboard experience is bland. Let me stop for a second and say that we were on Viking Ocean. Viking also operates European river cruises, cruises in Egypt and Asia, and cruises on the Mississippi and expedition cruises. But our experience was on Viking Sun. So, why'd we pick Viking? As I said earlier, who better to see Norway with than with a Norwegian company? Viking is privately owned, no mega corporations here. As such, the owner has control of everything, and one thing he insists on is that all of the ships in his ocean fleet are designed exactly the same. Exactly the same. Essentially identical. So, if you've seen one Viking ocean ship, you've seen them all. I guess in that way, the owner ensures his customers know what they're getting into and everything feels familiar to them. But companies building ships today are always looking for the innovative, the new, and trying to offer that wow factor that will set them apart from other ships and in doing so, attract new customers. The ship was lovely and our stateroom was well appointed. And when you're traveling in colder climates like we did, the heated floor in the bathroom is a thoughtful and welcome touch. Because of our itinerary, blackout curtains were provided and they did a fantastic job of keeping the room dark in the middle of a sunny night. Okay, here's another example of how the experience lacked pizzazz. One afternoon, they were having a music trivia contest, kind of like Name That Tune, if you remember that show. The host would play a little snippet of a song, and the teams would have to guess the name of the song. On this particular day, it was the Beatles versus ABBA. Now look, you don't have to be a music history student to recognize most of these groups' tremendously popular songs. So, the first Beatles song plays, like 3 seconds, and it's clearly Hey Jude. Well, the teams jump into action. The next is the first ABBA song, and it is undeniably Mamma Mia. The room is dead silent. Everyone was looking around like the second movement of Brahms' Requiem had just been played. Duncan and I sat there with our jaws on the floor. We leaned into each other and said, "Do they not know Mamma Mia?" With that, we received a whole bunch of scowls and a very loud shh. The next Beatles was up. Undoubtedly, the opening notes to Hard Day's Night. How could you not know that? Teams huddled. ABBA was up next, and it was without a doubt Dancing Queen. Oh my God. The room was completely perplexed. Dancing Queen, we both muttered, and received the same reprimand as before, although this time the host told us that if we wanted to play, we could, but if not, we had to either stay silent or leave. Every other cruise that we've been on, the trivia contests were actually pretty challenging and got you to think. On Viking, the first few notes of Let It Be were as challenging as it got. We didn't want to ruin their fun, so we went back to our cabin. Life on board was pretty routine. Viking doesn't have shows or a casino. Entertainment is limited to pianists and small ensembles. They did have lectures about some of the destinations, but the presentations were recorded and you could watch them back in your stateroom. One of the most fun and memorable activities was the Arctic Circle crossing party. There's a marker on the shore, visible from the ship, that indicated where the Arctic Circle began. Guests assembled on the very frigid pool deck, and volunteers were handed buckets filled with ice water, which you then dumped on your head. I did it. Yeah, it was pretty brutal for a few seconds, but a quick dash into the heated pool, and all was right again. I received a certificate from the captain about receiving an honor, etc., etc. Come to think of it, I have no idea where that certificate is, or if I even kept it. It was a clever way to mark the passage north. More on the itinerary in a bit. As far as dining goes, unlike most ships that have multiple restaurant options, Viking has 3. the restaurant, which is the main dining room, Manfredi's, an Italian bistro, and the chef's table, a tasting menu experience. There's also Mamsen's, which is a snack light meal option, most famous for waffles. Of course, there's a buffet for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We like to have a drink before dinner and would always go to the Explorer's Lounge, which was usually pretty empty, and we became friendly with the wonderful bartenders and servers who quickly learned our preferences. On Viking, beer and wine are included with lunch and dinner. Cocktails were an additional fee, but guests can book a beverage package, which we did. A vast majority of the passengers didn't, but they sure took advantage of the beer and wine at lunch and dinner. We booked our dinner reservations for either 7:30 or 8 o'clock, and upon arrival would notice that most people were finishing their meals, and by the time our dinner was over, we were usually some of the last people in the restaurant. Walking back to the Explorer's Lounge for an after-dinner drink, we noticed that the ship was practically empty, devoid of people with musicians playing to empty rooms. Everyone had already gone to bed. Too much wine, I guess. The food on board was very good, and the service was fantastic. The wine selection was very good as well. The staff was always friendly and welcoming. Our stateroom was kept immaculate. In addition to the waffles at Mamsen's, which is Norwegian for mother, the other favorite tradition was afternoon tea served in their winter garden, a lovely room that looks very much like a conservatory, all glass with tons of light. Well, let's face it, on this cruise, everywhere there was tons of light. Afternoon tea was set up with towers of treats and, obviously, pots of a wide variety of tea. And it was packed every day at 4 o'clock, if I recall. Now here's the weird thing. You could get a pot of tea from the buffet, Mamsen's, or room service at any time. If you feasted on the tower of baked goods, who'd be hungry for dinner, and dinner at 6 o'clock, which is when most people had their dinner? The last odd thing about this shindig is that afternoon tea was the only time the room was used. At all other times, it sat empty. But the other passengers loved it, so clearly it's a perk for some people. So that's life on board. But even before we boarded, Norway threw us a curveball. To get to the port of Bergen from the US, you usually have to fly to either Oslo or Copenhagen and then connect to a flight to Bergen. We flew into Oslo on now defunct Norwegian Air. I'm going to remind you of one of my mantras when traveling. Stuff happens. That's the PG version. So we're standing at the baggage carousel in Oslo. The Norwegians are just like many other European cultures, very tied up, precise, and excellent at communication. So we're standing there and watching the bags come off and people leaving, bags off and people leaving, until finally the screen reads, "Last bag delivered." And a few minutes later, the carousel stops. They lost our luggage. Okay, no big deal. We had booked a hotel in Bergen, so there was time to find our bags and get them to us before we boarded the ship. In previous episodes, I've talked about whether you should book flights a day or two prior to your boarding day. Well, here's why. So we go do the paperwork at the baggage desk and head upstairs to catch our connecting flight to Bergen. We arrive and, not having to wait for luggage, hop a cab to the hotel. We arrive and explain the situation, and the front desk receptionist who, without hesitation, said, "Oh, yeah, happens with Norwegian all the time." Reminds you that travel is about adventure and going with the flow. So we go for a walk and find a large department store. Let the retail therapy begin. A couple of hours and several bulging shopping bags later, we purchase replacement clothing for what we assume has been lost. The salesperson was in commission heaven, and when she heard about our situation, replied, "Oh, Norwegian loses luggage all the time." Seriously? So we haul our overstuffed shopping bags back to the hotel. We almost looked like we robbed the store, but we had receipts 200 yards long trailing behind us. Back at the hotel, we checked with the front desk to hear whether they had heard anything, since we hadn't received any update on the Norwegian app. Nope, nothing new. We went out for dinner, which was excellent. Norwegian food obviously leans heavily into seafood, but also game, and it was an excellent culinary education for us both. Back to the hotel, great night's sleep. Although, dodging those shopping bags in the middle of the night was quite the obstacle course. The next day, we got up and went for breakfast. Still no news on the wayward bags. While we were eating, we got a text from the hotel. Hallelujah, the bags had arrived. We dashed back, and lo and behold, there they were. Now, what do we do with all the clothes we bought? With bags in tow, we trudged back to the store. As we walked into the men's department, I can't adequately describe the look on the salesperson's face. Approaching the counter, she dejectedly said, "Your bag showed up, right?" All we could do was nod as she processed the refund. We just hoped she didn't go out and buy a new car with her commission money, but in all honesty, it seemed like she was used to this process. You win some, you lose some. Norway. It's often overlooked by U.S. travelers as a destination. Honestly, that's too bad, because Norway and its people are gorgeous. Our trip took us from Bergen, a picture postcard town that is precisely what someone envisions when they think of Norway. Colorful wooden houses lined up along the harbor, with fishing boats bobbing gently in the water and the smell of the sea drifting on the breeze. Our stops in Norway included Geiranger, Tromsø, Lofoten, and Honningsvåg, the farthest northern port in Europe. We took shore excursions in each port, from Geiranger's rainy, misty journey to Dalsnibba, and a kayaking trip to the waterfalls along the fjord, to Lofoten's coastal charm. The temperatures began to dip when we arrived in Tromsø and took a rib boat to view some of the coastal towns, and had a much appreciated stop for hot chocolate while taking in the tranquil setting. Finally, sailing into the Arctic Circle to Honningsvåg, in an area known as the Nordkapp, the most northern point in Europe, and one of the most informative, entertaining, and delicious shore excursions we've ever taken. We were kitted out in Arctic outerwear and boarded a rib boat, a rubber inflatable motorboat, and went with our guides to their king crab traps to grab a few of the crabs for a treat back on shore. It was cold. Really cold. The Arctic Circle. No surprise. Did you know that the Norwegians view the crabs as a pestilence? The crabs eat the herring, which is a staple of the Norwegian people. But the crabs are also a lucrative export to Asia, which buys the crabs at an outlandishly high premium. Still, Norway can't get rid of them fast enough. The crabbers pull up one of the traps, and the crabs are literally dangling off the trap, like 20 or 30 of them. A few of the crabs were pulled off and dumped onto the floor of the rib. Scared? No, the creatures moved slowly and basically sat where they were thrown. But they were big, with a large span from claw to claw. The rib zoomed to shore into a small village where we disembarked and headed for what was, for all intents and purposes, a large tepee, the top of which was billowing smoke. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant warmth. We were there. The Norwegians cooked the crabs in the seawater, and we were told how the tradition was to eat the cooked crab with a slice of buttered brown bread. We feasted until we could eat no more. One guest asked one of the guides, "Aren't you going to have some?" "No," he smiled. "Never touch this stuff." I guess when you can have a king crab every day, it's not really a delicacy anymore. We headed back to the ship, bellies full, and having a better understanding of the reality of harvesting king crab in Norway. It's best now to talk about the focus of this journey into the midnight sun. What does that mean, and is it real? Here's the Reader's Digest version. The farther north you go, the less the Earth's rotation affects the daylight. The opposite is true for Viking's Northern Lights cruise, when it is dark for the majority of the day. So, as each day passed, sunset got later and later until it virtually didn't happen, and then it didn't happen at all. Weird? A bit. In many ways, completely fascinating. Imagine living in a place where it's light all day and night. Could you do it? I don't think I could. So here's a practical example. We were pretty far north and had gone to dinner, still in essentially full daylight. I already told you that Duncan and I would go out for an after-dinner drink in the Explorer's Lounge. We would sit and look out at the beautiful sea, enjoying the sun glinting off the gentle waves, until one of us realized, "Oh my gosh, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. We have to go to bed." And we'd rush off to our stateroom, realizing we only had a few hours before we had to get up for the next morning's excursion. Maybe the people eating dinner at 6 o'clock had the right idea. Fortunately, our cabin was equipped with those blackout curtains, and there was only a small sliver of sunlight so that we were able to get a good night's sleep. So the midnight sun thing is real. The farther north we went, the later the sun would set, until we got to Honningsvåg, where the sun didn't set at all. Many years ago, we were in South America. I believe it was Ushuaia, Argentina. There, the sun was only up for a few hours, and the rest of the time, it was dark. When we were in Ushuaia, we were told that during those times of the year when it's dark for 20 hours, the suicide rate jumps dramatically. So the Argentine government actually turns on the lights of the soccer stadium so that people can go there and sit in the light, and the suicide rate dropped. But sun all the time was strange too. Listen, we think it's bad when we have to spring forward in March and fall back in November. So what would you rather have? All sun or mostly all dark? The cruise itself was lovely, with many days sailing between the fjords, majestic, tall hills thick with vegetation. Occasionally, a small village would come into view. Just a few small but colorful timber houses, some with wisps of smoke drifting out of the chimney, and the small steeple of the town church rising into the sky. The ship sailed close to the shore, and it was so tranquil that you could hear the bells of the cows and reindeer grazing on the nearby hillside. Every now and then, you could spot a car traveling along the road that ran through the town. This was the epitome of off-the-grid living. Of course, the practical side of me wondered, where do they do their grocery shopping? What happens if someone is very sick or injured? What do they do when it snows or the power goes out? And of course, how cold must it get in the winter? But we sailed on from port to port, admiring the simplicity of this life along the way. When you looked toward the bow of the ship, it was impossible to see the route the ship was following, as it appeared the land was blocking our way. The fjords seemed to surround us on all sides. Rising like the grassland and forests were growing right out of the water. The water was calm and flat as a mirror, the ship's wake creating a gentle shimmer on the surface as we passed. It was a completely unhurried journey. When we arrived in Tromsø, we were shocked at the contrast between the other ports. This was a modern city, bustling, where the others had been quaint, charming fishing villages. Where Lofoten and Honningsvåg featured small fishing boats bobbing on the water in the cozy harbors, Tromsø was built on both sides of the water, with a steel bridge spanning the width, modern hotels for tourists, and even fast food restaurants. You can guess which ones. Everywhere you looked. Comparing Tromsø to other ports was like night and day. Okay, sorry I couldn't help use the pun. But it was true, and while the contrast was stark, it was nice to see this side of Norway that we hadn't been exposed to. Norway was as beautiful as we hoped it would be. We got lulled into a sense of security right up until we entered the Norwegian and North Seas. Then, things got rough. Really rough. So rough that we had to skip our call in the Shetland Islands and had to be rerouted to a different port in the Orkney Islands, both Scottish island archipelagos. Duncan and I like ship movement, the proverbial motion of the ocean. Our fellow travelers? Not so much. If people were scarce on board in the evenings while sailing through the fjords, they were non-existent sailing the open sea. But somehow, they still managed to make it up to the Winter Garden for afternoon tea every day. The weather every day had been beautiful, and as we headed south, sunset returned. The seas calmed down, and a sense of normalcy returned. Our last port was a very chilly and very rainy Edinburgh, and we felt like we drew the short straw on Scotland and have made a commitment to go back and visit it properly. We did the touristy London things with an amazing guide, and even had a thrilling moment when Prince Philip and then Prince Charles zipped by on their way to wherever it is they go. So there you have it. As we always do, Duncan and I did a recap of the trip at one of our dinners in London. And just as a side note, if you're in London, venture out a little farther for dining options. You'll save a boatload, couldn't help myself, and find some amazing hidden gems not too far from the center of city. We always start with what we enjoyed the most, or what was our favorite part of the trip. Most memorable was the king crab lunch. I felt like it was authentic, especially eating in the smoky tepee and getting up close and personal with those crabs. He agreed, and we both said the midnight sun portion of the experience was unforgettable. It lived up to our expectations. The ship. Lots of positives. The staff was outstanding, and our room was perfect. If you don't already know, food plays a big factor in my enjoyment of any journey we take, regardless of destination. You'll notice that I didn't talk a lot about the food on the ship, which for me is odd. Why? The food on Viking Sun was very good. although Manfredi's, the Italian restaurant, was no better than I could get at a restaurant at home or make myself in my own kitchen. While very good, there was very little memorable overall about the food, which for customers that Viking attracts, I think is okay. The itinerary was excellent, and we got to see the natural beauty of Norway from various angles and were impressed by it. The excursions ran from excellent to dull. What a majority of the guests wanted to do was ride on a bus while the guide announced, "And on your right, and on your left," and then to be taken back to the ship for lunch and free wine. We opted for more active outings, which turned out to be very small groups who, like us, wanted not just to see the country, but to experience it. To feel the cold air fresh on your face as the ribboat zipped along the water. To taste the tender crab meat freshly prepared in the traditional way, and to smell the wood smoke as it heated the giant vats of boiling seawater in which they were cooked. For all its white bread blandness, nothing on board could dim the thrill of stepping onto deck at 2 a.m. and seeing your breath in the frigid air as the sunlight blazed across the Arctic horizon. That was what we came for, and that was what we got. But that wasn't the end of the story, because while this cruise left us cold in some ways, it taught us that not all experiences are going to be outstanding, and that different cruise lines appeal to different people. Which is what I'm going to be talking about in my next episode, when I'll sit down with my friend travel advisor Dee to talk about what's the best travel fit for a wide range of interests and travel lifestyles. If you've enjoyed this episode of Explorations All Over, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen. And if you've ever experienced the midnight sun yourself, I'd love to hear about it. You can connect with me on Instagram or Facebook at Explorations All Over. You can also check out the Explorations All Over YouTube channel for companion videos to all of my episodes. Until next time, I'm Russ, this is Explorations All Over, and I'll see you soon.